Alright guys, so I'm going to be doing a review of a comic that I've been meaning to review. It was one of the first comics that my good friend Chris sent to me. Chris, I know you're watching this. Thank you, brother. And that is the DC label book, The Other History of the DC Universe, written by John Ridley, who some of you guys would know best as the writer of, the scriptwriter of the movie 12 Years a Slave. He's also been doing a lot of other films. He's also been doing a lot of DC and comics. He's been actually like becoming a DC major writer right now. So yeah. So, what is the other history of the DC universe? Like, sorry about that. So yeah, what is the other history of the DC universe? This is basically what this comic is basically one giant like compendium of the DC universe, of what the DC universe is, and but there's a catch, because it's not told from the perspectives of like Superman or Batman. This is told from the perspective of the minority characters of the DC universe, particularly Black Lightning, the Herald, Katana, Renee Montoya, and one of Black Lightning's daughters at the end. They basically like bookend the two stories. So yeah. So each one they chronicle the different decades, and this comic is pretty brutal. It's I don't want to say dark because that's not a word I would want to use in a situation like this, but this does get into some pretty dark shit, in that they actually reference actual events that happened in actual history. Like, perfect example, in the early days when Black Lightning was technically the first black superhero in DC history, he was really just there for a minority, and he actually talks about being at the 1970s Olympics, which, if you guys know, that was when there was a massacre that happened, and what happened that followed was that it was a whole thing happened in the Middle East, and we also had the several people who were taken by terrorists, and from the U.S. Embassy, and Jimmy Carter really did nothing. So this kind of talks about, like, there's this whole thing where, like, Black Lightning is like, he wanted to join the Justice League, but at the same time they announced that it was a political thing, so we couldn't get into it. Unless, like, a supervillain stepped in, the Justice League wanted to remain neutral. And he was talking about how, like, they remained neutral when King was killed, they were neutral when Malcolm X was killed, they were neutral when Kennedy was shot. They talk, like, Black Lightning basically says, like, yeah, like, all the superheroes were like, you know, you have all this power, and the more I wanted to join them, the more I, like, became more pessimistic about them. It's not that I hated them, it's just, like, it felt like they could be doing so much, but they were doing not enough. I really did like that. I really like that about this comic. I also liked how each hero talks about the different generations, and Black Lightning's is probably the most brutal, because, like, he was the first black superhero, and then came Vixen and the others, and he was more or less like, along the lines of, hey, I just feel like I'm a minority here, what am I supposed to do? So he was kind of jaded about all that. Then we get to Herald and Bumblebee. Yeah, Herald and Bumblebee from the Teen Titans, and their whole thing covers the 80s, and they actually talk about the Crisis on Infinite Earths and everything that happened with the Titans. Like, they talk about, like, how, like, it changed things, but they could still remember. Black Label is known for being an out-of-continuity book, so I'll forgive it, because, like, they basically talk about all the crises that happen. Like I said, they straight up talk about, like, the Crisis on Infinite Earths. They talk about Identity Crisis. They talk about all these different things, like, the Infinite Crisis, Flashpoint. They talk about all that, but they talk about, like, the effects of the minority characters and what that had on those characters. Katana was talking about being an Asian American who essentially was seen as a murderer, and having, like, this bullet on her back, this bullet painted on her back, this target painted on her back for being an Asian American, and even by her own people, like, she was seen as, like, a stereotype. Renee Montoya talked about how it was hard being not only Latina but also a lesbian in the Gotham police force, and how like really even Bullock, for much he cared about her, still kind of gave her shit for being a lesbian and a woman in the police force, because he was that ass backwards, because it's Harvey fucking Bullock. It's a very well done comic. However, it is not done in your traditional comic book sense. I will say it is not done in your traditional comic book sense, because allow me to show you real quick. Yeah, there's panels. Don't get me wrong. There's like panels and all that, but like, it's more written like a storybook. It's more like a big like storybook, and it's more like told from the accounts of those characters. Yeah, like they talk about the death of Superman and the death and rebirth of Superman, but it is not. It is a comic book, but not in the traditional sense. It's more like a big. It's like a big novel with pictures in it, and it talks about all these like really brutal moments in history, not just in the DC universe, but just historically as well. It really does cover like where were the DC superheroes when 9/11 happened, or you know it talks about all of that, like all the way leading up to the present time. This is, like I said, it lives up to the Black Label name, but it's also not pessimistic either. Like John Ridley's not like what I also like about this is that John Ridley also doesn't make it out that the Justice League are bad people. Like he basically says like, yeah, they were had their hands politically tied through most of the series. And they talk about those moments with the DC universe, because Ridley's not like saying like, oh, they're the Justice League is full of nobody, like these white privileged superheroes. No, he's not like that. It's more like they didn't know, like the superheroes didn't know where they stood politically and had their hands tied by the UN most of the time. So I like that. It's not like and although you could make the argument that that's the case, because there was a great moment. There's actually a great moment in here where Black Lightning is talking about why didn't Superman just fly in and save everyone from the U.S. Embassy attack, and he goes, well, Batman is a goddamn paranoid idiot. I know that firsthand. I work with the jackass. Wonder Woman, however, is a warrior with a sword. Why didn't she go in? But was Superman angling for like the Nobel Peace Prize or some shit? I don't know. So I like that. But he that's the thing, is that this is written from a guy who truly loves the DC universe. That's what I really love about this. And I really like the idea that it's told from the minorities of the DC universe, because let's be real, the DC universe for the longest time did lack a lot of ethnicity in their comics. Like, it wasn't a big thing until the 80s, when you had, the late 70s, early 80s, when you had, like, Bumblebee and the Herald. You had Cyborg. You had, well, in the 70s, you had Jon Stewart show up. And they do talk about, like, Jon Stewart's suicide. This is the other thing I like about this comic, is that, like, John Ridley did his fucking homework on this. Like, there is stuff in here where I had to comb back and be like, oh, that actually happened in the DC Comics. Like, yeah, this guy knows his shit, or at least did some heavy-ass research for this book. Like, that is amazing in of itself. So, do I recommend the other history of the DC Universe? Oh, sorry, that's lightning. But yeah, do I recommend the other history of the DC Universe? Abso-fucking-lutely. This is a great book. It is a beefy one, too, and it did take me a while to read through it. So, yeah. And it's not your traditional comic book, and there are some other things I'm not going to spoil in here that do happen that are basically like, oof, that was heavy. Like, there's some heavy shit that goes on in this book, so be prepared. This is not for the faint of heart. But if you are looking for a comic that not only has a bite to it, but also has great representation and comes from someone who truly loves the DC universe and wanted to tell the story of characters that people are now cherishing and loving now, finally, go get this book. Seriously, go get this book right fucking now. But anyway, I'd like to thank Chris, aka the Mount Vernon Kid. Thank you, brother, for sending me this book and all the others. I just got more comics from him today as of this recording. But yeah, so once again, hope you all enjoyed this review. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.